So in the software field, one thing I don't think is talked about enough is social anxiety and just how many people struggle with it in this field. I went from a place where I had a huge amount of social anxiety to a place where I'm pretty happy where I am overall. But this isn't just something for your social life, it's for your tech career as well. And having a lot of social anxiety can really hinder the trajectory of your career. And I think at least on tech YouTube, it's not something that's talked about a lot. And I think it's because it's a touchy subject. Like I see all these amazing tech YouTubers with their amazing jobs, but one thing I always wanted to know about from them was how they overcame their own anxieties and imposter syndrome. So I want to keep it as real as possible and talk about my own experiences and how I overcame them in the end. And hopefully there's some lessons that you can take from this as well. I think social anxiety is so common in computer science related professions because the job itself doesn't require as much social interactions as like say an analyst or like a product manager or something. And our social skills are just like muscles. If you don't constantly train and use it daily, they're gonna wither away. I think kids who spend a lot of time on their computers, like me, are the ones who are more likely to go into computer science. And even the major itself doesn't really lend itself to a lot of group work. There's more of a focus on problem sets or projects that you pull all-nighters and do by yourself. So from my own personal experience, I am Taiwanese American and I'm very proud of my culture and my background, but it's definitely a cultural thing for Asians to kind of disregard the social aspect of growing up and focus more on the math and science portion. I've always had like a huge amount of social anxiety ever since I was a kid. And if you don't know what that feels like, I kind of describe it as kind of like having a lump in your throat and like a tightness in your chest where you have so many things you want to say, but you just say nothing really because you're afraid of being judged for what you say. And for me at college, it improved a lot over the years just because of how many people I was meeting on a day-to-day basis. Like I joined clubs and I met a good amount of friends. And the more I talked to people, the more the feeling kind of went away. But it all returned when it was finally time for me to enter the workforce and get my first job as a software engineer. When you're with your friends, it's not really that scary to say what's on your mind. But in the workplace, it felt completely different to me. So it was something about being in a place where I'd have to see the same people every single day, and my livelihood and pay were resting upon how likable I was to other people, or at least it seemed that way. It was especially daunting for me. And the problem with social anxiety is that it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, where the more anxious you are, the more you want to avoid these social interactions, and the more you avoid them, the worse it gets. So for the first few years of my career, I found it really difficult to develop in my own career because I had struggles doing one-on-ones with my managers, asking for raises, asking for promotions, negotiating my salary, which really led to a stunted growth in my career trajectory. And in my head, it was always a problem that was uncomfortable, but I always felt like it wasn't that big of a deal to solve because I didn't really need to talk to people, right? I mean, I was just an engineer. I could just do everything by myself. And as long as I worked hard, my work would show for itself. So that really couldn't be farther from the truth. It's absolutely something I needed to address because not fixing it, besides being extremely inconvenient to my own social life, was actually heavily hindering my career growth and my salary now and in the future. Being too nervous to have one-on-ones and talk about your pay and promotions is gonna affect you in the long and short term. And there's a ton of other things that are affected too. The first being, it's hard to develop your soft skills, like effective communication with your coworkers to save time on projects, networking with your coworkers so you can potentially make future connections, or even just making friends in the workplace. And second, it'll be really hard for you to get help from your senior engineers because you'll be too nervous to ask them for help. And the last and probably biggest thing is going to be your ability to contribute in meetings, which determines a lot about how other people perceive you and your promotion. So meetings are all about getting your thought processes and opinions across to others, but I found that I was being constantly run over and spoken over at meetings. And I succumbed to a lot of pressures in these meetings too. Stuff like, will this really take a day? And you'll end up spending your own time outside of work trying to make this deadline because you overcommitted because of pressure from others. And the list goes on and on. So how did I tackle it? It's honestly something I'm still working on daily, but I feel like I'm in a pretty good spot these days. Just a year ago, I would never have even dreamed of putting my thoughts and feelings on a video and uploading it to YouTube. But I mean, here I am. Honestly, it was just a lot of trial and error and was up for years and years. I knew it was always a problem, but I did not know how to fix it. And I knew there were books out there about how to be a better communicator and all that stuff, but I really didn't want to read them because I felt like even opening one of those books was admitting to myself that this was a problem. And then I watched this video that YouTube recommended to me from a channel called Charisma on Command. So this is a channel where they kind of coach people on different social interactions and stuff like that. Definitely a channel I would never have clicked on in the past. But the video was instead about Game of Thrones characters. and why they were perceived the way they were. The one I watched being why Tywin Lannister was perceived as such a tyrant. And after the video, I was like completely hooked. I started watching all the videos on that channel that I could find, and I stumbled upon one about meetings and group interactions. One of them being about the problem of people speaking over you. You see, it was explained as it's okay for people to cut in a conversation. It's usually normal, but you at least need to finish the sentence that you were on. It's like a subconscious way of being perceived by others, and it helps with your own confidence and being heard. I'll definitely link the video because they explain it much better than I'm explaining it right now. But then I thought, wait, how else could I improve my skills? Well, the first thing was all those books that I avoided. Starting with the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. So this is literally the exact kind of book I would avoid previously because I felt like the name itself implied that the reader had no friends. But when I finally bought this book and I started reading through the first few pages, I knew this was gonna change my life. I really hated reading books before this, but I read through this book so fast and I learned so many things. And after that, it was just reading books after books and applying everything I learned to my workplace and my life. And the single most transformative book I ever read was one called The Social Skills Guidebook. So this is again, one of those books with a title that just sounds so embarrassing, but I cannot overstate how important it was for me. There's just a gold mine of information in there. And most specifically, it lists a lot of different social situations and how that when they break down, it's not your fault. It really drills into you that when you have awkward interactions, it's completely normal. Even the most social and outgoing people in the world will have awkward moments, messed up interactions, and missed social cues. And in the workplace, everyone's gonna have that day where they have an awkward silence with their coworker, where they have a weird, awkward one-on-one with their manager, and no one is expected to be perfect. And that's a concept that I mentally reference almost every single day. And you might think that's really obvious, but for me, I had always thought I had to be 100% perfect in order to get rid of my social anxiety. And that's impossible. And after I accepted that, I really created a level of calmness in my head in these social interactions. And it really improved my confidence knowing that you didn't have to be perfect. And the more awkward interactions you have, the better you can learn about them and improve them to make sure they don't happen in the future. From it, my one-on-ones with a manager have improved. My negotiation skills have improved. I'm less anxious to ask people for help. I'm less anxious about looking like an idiot when other people ask me for help. And I think most importantly is that when I struggle with something socially, instead of pretending like it's not a problem, I actively look up solutions and books for me to help me improve that part of my life. And I apply them once I learn them. I'm not saying that I'm the most outgoing person in the world now, but the overall amount of stress I experience on a day-to-day has decreased dramatically. And in terms of my career, I'm able to do a lot of the things that I wasn't able to before. And I think as software engineers, this is something we should be able to talk about a little bit more openly to help others who are struggling with the same issue and improve upon it themselves. Let me know if this is something you struggle with down in the comments, and hopefully I can offer some words for you too.